The train chugged into Miller's Crossing, a weary sigh of metal and steam. I stepped onto the platform, dust coating my worn uniform, searching for Sarah. She stood by the old water tower, a bundle in her arms, not a blanket, but a baby. My breath caught, a cold stone in my chest. Silas Stone emerged from the shadows, a smirk twisting his lips. "She needed a real man, Owen," he drawled, "when you were off playing soldier." The journey home had been a slow unraveling, each mile peeling back layers of grime and memory. I had pictured Sarah waiting, her face etched with relief. The small cottage a sanctuary from the roar of cannons and the screams of dying men. Instead, a hollow ache filled the space where comfort should have been. The baby in her arms was small, swaddled tight, its tiny head a dark fuzz against her shoulder. It took only a moment for my eyes to register the unfamiliar shape of its features, the impossible fairness of its skin compared to our own darker coloring. The silence stretched between us on the dusty platform, thick and heavy, punctuated only by the departing train's receding clatter. Sarah's gaze, when it met mine, held a sorrow I had never seen before, a deep well of guilt and something else I couldn't yet name. She spoke the name, Silas Stone, in a whisper that was barely audible over the wind. The preacher, the man who had officiated our wedding, who had baptized our kin, who had spoken of God's grace from the pulpit every Sunday. The truth, when it came, was not a sudden explosion, but a slow, burning ash in my throat. I left Sarah standing there, the baby stirring, and walked directly to the church. The wooden doors felt heavy, cool beneath my hand. Silas was inside, arranging hymn books, his back to me. The afternoon light filtered through the stained glass windows, painting the aisle in muted colors. He turned, a slight startle in his eyes, then a flicker of something I recognized as defiance. His voice, usually sonorous, was tight. "Owen, we thought you were gone for good." My hand found the hilt of the Bowie knife at my side, a weight I had carried through 100 skirmishes. It was a familiar comfort. He saw the movement, his eyes widening. I felt a coldness settle over me, deeper than any winter frost. There was no rage in me then, only a grim certainty. The blade was swift, a flash of steel in the quiet sanctuary. Silas Stone fell without a sound, his body sprawling on the polished oak floor, his blood spreading like a dark stain across the hallowed ground. I stood over him for a moment, feeling nothing but a profound emptiness, a chilling lack of regret. When I returned to the cottage, Sarah looked at me, her eyes red-rimmed, her face pale. She didn't ask what I had done. She knew. Her grief, I soon realized, was not for my return, nor for the immediate terror of my act. It was for Silas. Every time she looked at the child, a quiet ache settled in her features, a silent tribute to the man I had killed. The baby, our baby now, became a constant reminder, a living echo of her betrayal. The town did not rise up in outrage. The war had taken too much, stripped too many of their certainty. The men who had returned, or who had not, had seen things, done things, that reshaped the edges of morality. There was quiet judgment in the glances of the women, a subtle turning away from the men, but no outright condemnation. Owen Miller had returned, a soldier, and a man had crossed him. That was the unspoken consensus. I declared my intention to live in peace, a hard promise I made to myself. The deep scars of the war and Silas's betrayal hidden beneath a calm exterior. I found a way, or perhaps merely reached an agreement, to forgive Sarah. It was a cold arrangement, born of necessity and the stark reality of our situation. "It was a mistake," I said, the words hollow, "made in fear and loneliness." She nodded, her gaze fixed on the baby. She explained how the news had arrived, a dusty letter from a distant field, reporting Caleb and Seth Miller, my two younger brothers, gone, dead. That day, she said, the world had crumbled. Silas had offered comfort, words of faith, a hand to hold. Her emotions, she admitted, had been a tangled knot of grief, terror, and a desperate need for human warmth. Miller County was named for my family, for the many Miller men who had fought and died in every war this land had ever known. I was the last, the sole survivor of my direct line. My brothers, Caleb and Seth, had followed me into the conflict, eager and young, only to be swallowed by it. Sarah, like so many other women of the Confederacy, had spent those years tending the cemetery, her hands calloused from weeding, her hopes buried with the men who lay beneath the earth. She still went to the cemetery often, not just for Caleb and Seth, but for Silas. His headstone, simple and stark, bore witness to a love I knew I could never extinguish. Eleanor grew, a slender girl with eyes that saw more than she let on. She was caught between her mother's fierce, protective adoration and my own distant, watchful gaze. I loved her, of course. She was my daughter in every way that mattered, blood or not. But there was always a sliver of ice in my heart, a constant reminder of how she had come into this world. I taught her to work the land, to understand the rhythm of the seasons, the harsh demands of the soil. Sarah taught her grace, the quiet strength of women, how to make a home. Eleanor absorbed it all, a silent observer of the unspoken tension that hummed beneath the surface of our quiet home, a constant, low thrum of a secret she couldn't yet articulate. The story of Miller County, named for the men like me who had fought and often died, was a point of pride, yet it carried an undertone of sorrow. Then there was Silas, a name whispered in hushed tones, a local legend I knew too well, a ghost at the edge of Eleanor's understanding. She knew of the land named after him, a small parcel outside town, a quiet irony the adults seemed to overlook. She never asked why, sensing perhaps that some questions were best left unasked. That quiet strength, born of the austere landscape and the complicated love of her parents, grew within her, a backbone as unyielding as the oak trees bordering our fields. Years passed. Eleanor grew into a woman, her hands capable, her eyes clear. She married William Will Miller, a distant cousin, but close in spirit. He was a steady man, dependable, with a laugh that crinkled the corners of his eyes. They built their life on a piece of land neighboring ours, raising 3 sons and a daughter, their presence filling the emptiness that had settled in our valley. Their eldest, Robert, had his father's quiet seriousness. The twins, Thomas and David, were always into mischief, quick to laughter. And then there was Clara, their only daughter, a bright, curious girl who brought light wherever she went. Then, one gray autumn afternoon, the world shifted. Will was cutting timber, a task he'd performed 1,000 times, careful and methodical. A freak gust of wind, a rotten limb, a misjudged swing of the axe. The details were murky, pieced together from shaken neighbors who had found him. A logging accident, they said. Sudden, inexplicable, for a man as cautious as Will. Eleanor, barely into her 30s, became a widow. She stood at the graveside, her face pale, her gaze distant, clutching her children's hands. I saw in her eyes a reflection of Sarah's grief, a raw wound, yet there was also an unyielding resolve. She took over the farm, her quiet strength deepening into a formidable force. The field still needed plowing, the animals fed, the children raised. She simply carried on. Late at night, I knew, she replayed the events of Will's death, searching for answers, a persistent unease about its abruptness. It had been too sudden, too final, for a man who always measured his steps. The community, bound by the unspoken ties of rural life, rallied around her. Neighbors brought food, helped with the harvest, watched the children. There was quiet support, not pity, a testament to the enduring bonds forged in this hardscrabble land. Eleanor found comfort in her children, their small hands in hers, their innocent questions, their laughter. Her resilience shone through her grief, a beacon in the somber landscape of her new reality. I would sometimes catch Sarah watching Eleanor, an unreadable expression on her face, a mix of love, certainly, but also a deep sorrow, as if she saw a shadow of her own past reflected in her daughter's present. She would just shake her head slowly, a barely perceptible movement, and turn back to her work. Robert, Eleanor's oldest son, barely a teenager, stepped into the void left by Will. He began shouldering responsibilities beyond his years, his young shoulders already taking on the weight of the farm. He milked cows before dawn, worked the fields after school, his face set in a determined line. Life continued, stoic and unyielding, mirroring the Midwest itself, where the land demanded endless labor and offered sparse, hard-won rewards. We just kept going, day after day, through sun and frost, through joy and sorrow, one season bleeding into the next. After years of managing the farm alone, a young widow with 4 children, Eleanor found companionship again. She married Ethan Miller, a distant cousin, the son of my brother Seth, who had died in the war. Ethan was a good man, steady and kind, with hands made for work and a quiet humor that warmed their home. Together they added to their family, 2 daughters, Clara and Edith, and another son, Benjamin. Their household became a blend of Will's children and Ethan's, all raised under one roof, learning to share and to lean on each other. Robert, Thomas, David, and Clara now had younger siblings, extending the Miller line once more. Just as the children were growing, the shadow of a new war fell upon Miller County. They called it the war to end all wars, a phrase I found bitter and naive. Posters appeared in town, urging young men to enlist. Telegrams began arriving again, grim harbingers of loss. More local men marched off, many of them cousins, some of Ethan's kin from his mother's side. Eleanor felt the chilling echo of her mother's past, the fear of men not returning from battle, a dread she now understood with a visceral certainty. The cycle was repeating itself, a cruel turn of the wheel. Once again, Miller women became widows. Some, like Eleanor, found new partners within the close-knit community, their resilience a testament to the enduring human need for connection. Others, shattered by loss, packed what little they had and moved away, seeking new lives in distant towns, their departure leaving quiet holes in the fabric of our county. Our family, enduring, observed these patterns, a quiet acknowledgement of the ongoing cost of history, a silent understanding that peace was merely a pause between conflicts. Eleanor, a woman who had known loss intimately, made it her mission to instill resilience in her children. She taught them the importance of family, of sticking together when the world turned cold. She showed them the quiet strength needed to endure, not with grand gestures, but with the steady rhythm of daily chores, with a comforting word, with the unwavering presence that anchored them all. "We stand together," she'd say, her voice calm, "no matter what comes." Then, as if the echoes of war weren't enough, the Great Depression hit. The fields, which had always yielded enough for those who worked them, now seemed stingy. Prices plummeted. Dust storms rolled in from the west, coating everything in a fine, gritty layer. Economic hardship pressed down on the emotional burdens already carried by the community. Eleanor and Ethan worked tirelessly, from sunup to sundown, their hands raw, their backs aching, to keep their farm afloat. It was a testament to their unwavering spirit, a quiet defiance against the harshness of the times. They taught their children self-sufficiency, how to stretch a meal, how to mend a worn garment, how to find pride in honest labor. They also taught them the value of community support, of sharing a scarce resource, of helping a neighbor who was worse off. Eleanor would often tell stories of my own trials, of Sarah's struggles, of the complicated past that had shaped them. She never preached, just laid out the facts, letting the lessons sink in naturally. Her children grew up with a deep respect for the land, for its unforgiving nature and its occasional generosity, and for the sacrifices made by previous generations. They understood that their lives were built on the backs of those who came before them. Ethan proved to be a loving and supportive husband, a contrast to the emotional distance Eleanor had experienced from me as a child. He was present, engaged, a sturdy anchor in turbulent times. He listened, he shared the burdens, he offered a quiet strength that was both comforting and reliable. The Miller family, though scarred by war, by loss, by economic hardship, continued to be a pillar of the community, quietly enduring year after year. They found strength in their numbers, in the shared history that bound them together, an unbreakable thread woven through the fabric of adversity. Each birth, each new harvest, was a small victory, a quiet defiance against the forces that sought to break them. When Frank Cooper stepped off the bus in Scribbles, Arkansas, he was not the same lively young man who had left. The war had taken its toll, his time as a prisoner of war under the Imperial Japanese Army, a silent, heavy weight he carried. The familiar gravel roads, the endless fields of soybeans stretching to the horizon, were a stark reminder of what he had left behind, a world that now felt both distant and painfully close. Martha Denton, his sweetheart, was waiting. She ran to him, her embrace tight, silent tears streaking her face. She saw it immediately, the profound shift in him, the shadows in his eyes where laughter used to be. In 1947, with help from Martha's father, George Denton, a man with a steady hand and a sensible mind, Frank and Martha opened a general store and gas station. It sat at the crossroads of Holly and Vines, a dusty, sun-baked intersection that served as the pulse of the surrounding farms. They added a lunch counter, a simple affair with a few stools and a worn countertop. Martha cooked, her hands deft and practiced, serving up generous, home-cooked meals, fried chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans, that quickly became a local favorite among the farmers and the men working the fields. Frank, drawing on his army cook skills, started baking bread, his loaves fragrant and crusty, along with pies and cookies that smelled of home and hearth. Then there was the other business. Discreetly, in the back room, a small, dark corner away from the prying eyes of casual customers, Frank sold homemade liquor, a nickel a shot he'd offer, with a wink and a quick glance around. It was a common enough practice in those parts, a necessity for thirsty farmers after a long day under the sun. The daily ice delivery, a clanking truck that arrived precisely at noon, kept the drinks cold, and the general store thrived, becoming a true hub of activity for the community. Men gathered on the porch, spitting tobacco, swapping stories, their voices low and comforting. In April 1949, a new light entered Frank's quiet, purposeful life. Their son, Robert, whom everyone called Bobby, was born. Bobby became a fixture behind the counter, a curious child who absorbed the rhythm of the store, the chatter of customers, the clink of coins in the register. He watched his parents, his small face serious, learning the dance of commerce and community. Frank, who had returned from the war with a quietude that sometimes bordered on detachment, found renewed purpose in fatherhood. He held Bobby, taught him the names of tools, let him wipe down the counter with a damp rag. Bobby, with the fierce admiration only a young boy can hold, would often declare, "I want to be just like my dad." Martha would smile, a soft, knowing look on her face. "You'll be a good man, Bob," she'd say, "just like, your father." She'd already begun setting unspoken goals for him, ensuring he grew into a man of integrity and worth. Clarkston County Sheriff Bowman was a burly man with a perpetual scowl and a keen nose for illicit alcohol. He made a habit of trying to raid Frank's store, pulling up in his patrol car, his boots crunching on the gravel. "Heard you're running a speakeasy, Cooper," he'd grumble, leaning against the counter. Frank would just smile, a slow, confident grin. "Sheriff," he'd say, his voice even, "you know as well as I do this store is in Miller County." It was a long-standing local rivalry, the county line a constant source of friction, a line drawn through the very middle of their lives. Bowman would huff, knowing he was beaten, his jurisdiction ending just a few yards down the road. Martha would joke about it later, wiping down the counter. "One of these days," she'd say, "those two sheriffs will team up. Wouldn't that be something?" Frank would just shake his head, a wry amusement in his eyes. "Never happen," he'd dismiss. "Not with Hazel Peterson between them. That woman ensures they'll never agree on anything." The words hung in the air, a small, local mystery, a piece of the county's hidden history that Bobby, just a boy then, didn't yet understand. Bobby Cooper started at Thomas Jefferson Elementary the year the new bus route began. He'd catch it right outside the store, his lunch pail clanking, alongside his cousin, Larry Cooper. And of course, Brenda Peterson. Brenda was a feisty redhead, all freckles and quick retorts, who made it her mission to tease both Bobby and Larry, often leading to playful skirmishes that filled the bus with shouts and laughter. Mr. Evans, the long-suffering bus driver, with his perpetual frown, frequently threatened to kick the three off the bus for their antics. "One more peep out of you Coopers," he'd rumble, "and you'll be walking home." Martha would often tease Bobby, watching him stomp off to the bus, his face flushed from Brenda's latest jab. "One day, Bobby," she'd say, a knowing twinkle in her eye, "you'll wish Brenda still teased you." Bobby would scoff, his disbelief clear. "Never, Mom, she's just a pest." Frank, ever the quiet enforcer of manners, would gently correct Bobby's disrespectful tone. "That's no way to talk about a young lady, son. Remember your manners." He always reinforced the importance of family values, of respect, even for a teasing redhead. Larry's parents both worked long shifts at the Ubelhauser cotton mill, their days stretching into the evenings. So after school, the boys headed straight to the general store. They'd sit at the counter, hunched over their stools, their textbooks open, doing homework amidst the bustle of customers coming and going. The scent of coffee, gasoline, and Martha's cooking filled the air. Brenda, true to form, would often linger by the store's glass door, continuing her teasing from a safe distance before she'd finally walk down Holly Road to her small house, her red pigtails bouncing. Martha, ever the good host, would sometimes call out, "Brenda, why don't you come in for a soda?" Bobby would always dismiss it, waving his hand, "Nah, Mom, she's just silly." As they transitioned to James S. Conway High School, the bus dynamics shifted. The elementary school squabbles gave way to new concerns. Bobby, Larry, Brenda, Joni Anderson, and Carol Swanson were now a group of five, their conversations more serious, their glances lingering. Brenda, Joni, and Carol, with their burgeoning teenage lives, were too focused on boys, dances, and the latest trends to bother with teasing the boys anymore. Their energy shifted to whispered secrets and shared giggles. Larry, always a little more flamboyant, found his inspiration in the screen idols of the time. He started wearing a leather jacket, his jeans cuffed just so, a pack of cigarettes tucked into his sleeve. Though Frank made it clear he wasn't to smoke them inside the store. Larry adopted a rebel persona, a certain swagger in his step. He quickly became a popular figure, a great dancer, the kind of boy who drew a crowd. After school, he'd bring a lively group of teenagers to Frank's store. Recognizing a good business opportunity, Frank installed a jukebox, its colored lights blinking, its tunes filling the air with the latest rock and roll. The store, once a quiet hub for farmers, became a local teenage hangout. Larry's charisma, his easy charm, and his impressive dancing skills drew the attention of the girls, bringing a lively, sometimes boisterous energy to the quiet store. His presence transformed the space, adding a layer of youthful exuberance that made the old place feel new again. For those listening, stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. It turned out for Larry, they unfolded in ways no one could have predicted. The shadow of high school graduation stretched long over their final year, forcing Bobby, Larry, Brenda, Joni, and Carol to confront the futures awaiting them beyond the classroom doors. For Bobby, the pull was clear and strong. The family store. He felt a deep sense of duty, a quiet understanding that the legacy Frank and Martha had built, brick by worn brick, was his to uphold. He pictured himself behind the counter, just like his father, selling gum, flipping burgers, and offering a steady hand to the community. Larry, however, felt a different kind of pull. Restless and ambitious, he saw Miller County not as a haven, but as a cage, its dusty roads and familiar faces stifling his restless spirit. He dreamed of bright lights, big cities, a life far removed from the rhythm of the seasons and the scent of soybeans. Brenda, too, harbored quiet aspirations that reached beyond her mother's simple, predictable life. But unlike Larry, her path forward was unclear, a hazy landscape of unknown possibilities. Joni and Carol, their friends, were charting their own courses. Some planned to marry local boys, settle down, and raise families, while others spoke of college, of leaving town to find work in bigger factories or offices. Then a new arrival stirred the placid waters of Miller County. A charismatic outsider drifted into town, a man with a smooth smile and an easy way of talking, challenging the established routines and quiet norms. He had a car that gleamed, clothes that looked store-bought, not handmade, and a confidence that spoke of wider horizons. He quickly caught the eye of one of the younger women, and it was hard to tell if it was Brenda or Joni who was more captivated by his charm. The girls suddenly spent more time by the jukebox, their laughter a little louder, their glances a little bolder. Frank and Martha watched their son Bobby navigate these shifting currents. They saw him wrestling with his growing responsibilities at the store, balancing them with the early romantic interests that were starting to bloom. They knew he liked Brenda, though he never admitted it. They saw Larry's rebellious streak intensify, his eyes always scanning the horizon, pushing him further from the unspoken expectations of family and community. He was starting to miss shifts at the store, preferring the company of his new friends in the allure of the open road. Small-town gossip, a potent force in Miller County, circulated like wildfire. Whispers about the newcomer and his intentions, his past, his prospects, filled the air during morning coffee and Sunday church. Some saw him as an exciting change, others as a dangerous disruption. Soon enough, a new town issue arose, a proposal to build a larger grain silo that would affect several small farms, and Bobby and Larry found themselves on opposite sides. Bobby, ever practical and loyal to the existing community, saw the potential benefits for some, while Larry, fueled by his rebellious nature, sided with the farmers who felt they were being squeezed out. Their cousinly bond, once so strong, began to strain under the weight of their differing views. Then Brenda made a bold decision about her future, one that surprised everyone, especially her mother Hazel. She announced she was leaving Miller County, not for college, not for marriage, but to work in a factory in a bigger city, a move almost unheard of for a single young woman from a respectable family. Hazel Peterson, a woman of strong opinions and even stronger stubbornness, fumed. But Brenda, for the first time, held her ground. The economic landscape shifted again, posing new challenges for Frank and Martha's General Store. Bigger chain stores in nearby towns were starting to draw customers away, their prices lower, their selections wider. Frank, sitting on the porch after a slow day, would sometimes reminisce about his war experiences, quiet moments that hinted at unresolved trauma, scars that never quite healed. Seen things, he'd murmur, looking out at the soybean fields, things you wouldn't believe. The younger generation, standing on the precipice of adulthood, their choices poised to ripple through Miller County, were about to learn that life, even in a small town, was rarely simple. Years have a way of blurring the edges of memory, making the sharp corners of youth seem softer. Bobby, true to the quiet sense of duty he felt, had taken on more and more responsibility at the general store. He was a steady hand, a reliable presence, exactly the life Frank had envisioned for him, and a quiet anchor in the community. He'd married Joni Anderson, a sensible girl who understood the rhythms of small-town life, and they had 2 children, a boy and a girl, filling the old store with new laughter. Then Larry returned. The leather jacket was gone, replaced by a threadbare suit. The swagger was diminished, covered by a weary slump of his shoulders. He carried the weight of failed ambitions like an invisible burden, his dreams of escaping Miller County having come to naught. He had worked odd jobs, drifted from town to town, but never found the big life he sought. He just showed up one Tuesday, walking into the store as if he had only been gone a week, not 15 years. A few months later, Brenda came back too. Not for good, she said, just visiting. But she lingered. She had found success, working in an office in a distant city, her clothes sharp, her hair styled. Yet beneath the veneer of accomplishment, there was a quiet, knowing sadness in her eyes, a hint of battles fought and scars acquired out of sight. Her return, and then Larry's, stirred up old feelings, unresolved tensions among the group that had once huddled around the jukebox. The community, small and observant, began to watch. It started with glances, then whispers. Larry, restless and charming despite his failures, found himself drawn to Joni, Bobby's wife. He'd spend too long at the counter, his eyes lingering, his compliments a little too effusive. Joni, perhaps flattered by the attention, or perhaps feeling the quiet ache of a life that felt too settled, too predictable, responded. A new affair began to unfold, a slow, insidious mirroring of the original betrayal that had brought Owen Miller home to a stranger's child. The hushed tones, the knowing looks, the way conversations stopped when certain people entered a room, it all harkened back to Sarah and Silas, a generational pattern weaving itself into the fabric of the present. Frank Cooper, sitting on his usual stool behind the counter, sensed the echoes of past mistakes in the present, a quiet concern settling over him like the dust on the old shelves. He'd seen this dance before, felt the ripple of it. Martha, ever perceptive, noticed the subtle shifts in relationships, the strain in Bobby's usually placid demeanor. Bobby was working harder, longer hours, his brow furrowed, his laughter less frequent. He started coming home later, smelling of stale coffee and desperation. One afternoon, Bobby was cleaning out an old desk in the back room, a piece of furniture that had been there since Owen's time. Tucked away in a false-bottom drawer, he found a yellowed letter. It was from Owen to Sarah, a bitter, unforgiving note written just weeks after he'd returned from the war. It spoke not of forgiveness, but of a grudging acceptance, and contained a cryptic line about Silas's mistake, having cost us all more than you know, more than even Will paid. The words hung in the air, a long-buried family secret, perhaps related to Owen's true feelings, or even to Will's mysterious death, beginning to resurface. The sense of an impending crisis built, a low hum beneath the surface, threatening the fragile peace of the community, like a storm brewing on the horizon. Larry, driven by a gnawing loneliness and the ambition that still flickered despite his failures, made a morally questionable choice. He approached Joni not just with flirtation, but with a proposition, a scheme to leverage some old family land, a deal that Bobby knew nothing about, a plan that would benefit Larry but jeopardize Bobby's future. The generational patterns of infidelity and hidden desires, of men taking what they wanted, began to repeat themselves, casting a long shadow over the Cooper household. The truth, slow and inevitable, began to unravel, exposing vulnerabilities and hidden pains, the raw edges of broken trusts. The pay-the-price element started to manifest, not as a sudden calamity, but as a slow, tightening grip on their lives, as each character realized the weight of their choices. The affair, like a festering wound, could not remain hidden forever. It was Larry, bitter from years of failure and resentment, who exposed it. He didn't shout it from the rooftops, but let it slip in hushed tones strategically to the right ears. A careless word at the diner, a pointed comment on the store porch. The whispers, already circulating, solidified into hard, undeniable facts. Shockwaves rippled through Miller County, fracturing the familiar landscape of relationships, leaving jagged edges where once there had been smooth surfaces. The confrontation erupted in the very living room of Bobby and Joni's home, the air thick with accusation and betrayal. Voices, usually hushed, rose to a crescendo, raw emotions spilling out like broken glass. It was reminiscent of Owen's initial rage, a gut-wrenching scene that tore through the fragile peace of their home. Bobby, his face pale and drawn, was faced with a profound betrayal, forcing him to question everything he thought he knew about love and loyalty. Joni, defiant and tearful, defended herself, her words sharp, fueled by a desperation that mirrored Sarah's own long ago. Brenda, drawn into the vortex of the fallout, found herself entangled. Her quiet sadness now had a name, a reason. Her past choices, her unspoken feelings for Bobby, collided with the raw reality of the present. She had seen this dance before, not just in stories, but in the quiet sorrow of her own mother, Hazel. She knew the cost. The old letter found by Bobby became another weapon. The cryptic line about Silas's mistake and what Will paid was now fully revealed through Martha's tearful confession, spurred by the chaos. Will's death, long attributed to a logging accident, had been no accident. Owen, consumed by a quiet, simmering revenge for Silas's betrayal and the living reminder in Eleanor, had seen an opportunity. He had sabotaged the logging equipment, a precise, calculated act that ensured Will's fatal accident. A quiet, terrifying act of retribution, his own twisted justice for what he felt he had lost. The secret, buried for decades, added another layer of devastating complexity to the present crisis, twisting the knife in Bobby's already broken heart. Frank Cooper, drawing on his own past traumas, the shadows of the war still lingering in his eyes, attempted to mediate. He offered a voice of hard-won wisdom, speaking of the long-term cost of anger, the way bitterness poisons everything. "You think you want revenge," he said, his voice low, "but it just leaves you emptier." Martha struggled to cope with the escalating family drama, her usually steadfast nature tested to its limits. She wept for Bobby, for Joni, and for the ghost of Will, a man whose death had haunted her mother-in-law Eleanor for years. The community, having seen generations of such drama unfold, watched with a mix of sorrow and resignation. They knew the patterns. Social ostracization began to manifest for Larry and Joni. Tongues wagged, doors closed, and their names became synonymous with scandal. Their lives, once interwoven with the fabric of Miller County, began to unravel. Larry, in a desperate attempt to rectify his mistakes, to somehow win back a measure of respect, tried to expose a separate shady land deal he had been involved in, implicating the very people who had helped him reveal the affair. But the damage was already done. His credibility was shot. The ripple effects of the current betrayals touched upon the older generation. Eleanor, now a grandmother, heard the news of Will's true death, her face etched with a silent, profound grief. The moral dilemma reached its peak for Bobby, forcing him to choose between a broken loyalty to his wife, a fractured bond with his cousin, and the self-preservation of his own shattered sense of self. Relationships were irrevocably broken, leaving behind a landscape of regret and shattered trust, a wasteland of what might have been. In the end, the revenge story Ella Mishit saw Bobby take decisive action. He didn't raise a hand, didn't resort to violence. Instead, he systematically stripped Larry of everything, leveraging the shame and disgrace to force him out of the county again, ensuring he could never return. He also disinherited Joni, the old store, the land, everything she had built, now stripped away, leaving her with nothing but the children and the lingering shadow of her choices. It was a dramatic and painful climax, quiet in its execution, but devastating in its finality. The price for all of them was paid in full. The dust of confrontation settled over Miller County, leaving behind not a violent explosion, but a quiet devastation. The silence in Bobby and Joni's home was heavier than any argument, filled with the echoes of broken trust and unspoken accusations. Each character was left to pick up the pieces of lives irrevocably altered, facing the long-term consequences of actions that had rippled far beyond their immediate intentions. Bobby grappled with the profound betrayal, the memory of Larry's cruel satisfaction, the stark reality of Joni's choices. Healing would not come easy, nor would forgiveness. He knew with a certainty carved from pain that he would have to find a path toward acceptance, learning to live with the jagged edges of what remained. The general store, once a place of comfort and purpose, now felt burdened by the ghosts of his own family's making. Larry, exiled once more, found that his revenge against Bobby and Joni had brought him no peace, only a deeper, more profound emptiness. The brief satisfaction he felt had vanished like smoke, leaving him with the same gnawing loneliness he had always carried, amplified by the fresh wreckage he had created. He had sought to punish, but had only succeeded in isolating himself further. Brenda, having witnessed the unraveling of her childhood friends, made a decision about her own future. The chaos had brought a stark clarity. She recognized the recurring patterns, the way the past echoed in the present. She would not return to the small town's orbit. She chose a life away, valuing her hard-won independence over the entanglements of inherited drama, finding her peace in distance and self-reliance. Frank and Martha, their faces etched with the lines of hard lives and quiet observations, reflected on their own journey. They had seen generations marked by the same flaws, the same yearning for something just out of reach, the same human imperfections. A quiet sorrow mixed with their enduring love for their children and grandchildren. They understood Owen and Sarah's story now, not as a simple tale of betrayal, but as a complex tapestry of fear, loneliness, and the harsh realities of their time, providing a deeper context for the present's repeating patterns. Joni, stripped of her position, her reputation in tatters, began a long, difficult path. She sought no grand gestures, but made quiet, consistent efforts to atone, starting with her children, offering them a steadfast presence she had not always provided. The narrative explored different facets of morality. Had justice been served by Bobby's decisive actions against Larry and Joni? Or could empathy, a quieter, harder path, ultimately prevail? The community slowly began to heal, absorbing the new truths, finding ways to move forward, to remember, but also to build anew. The legacy of the Miller family, marked by both love and betrayal, by hard work and devastating choices, continued. It was redefined by Bobby's resolve, Brenda's independence, and Joni's quiet struggle for atonement. Through these choices, a form of redemption emerged, not as a sudden absolution, but through the consistent effort of living with consequences and seeking a different path. The final scene, years later, shows Bobby standing behind the counter of the general store, his hair silvering, his hands familiar with the worn wood. His children, now adults, work alongside him, their laughter a new sound in the old building. The jukebox still plays, but the tunes are different. The faces of the teenagers who gather around it are new. The road outside remains gravel. The soybean fields still stretch to the horizon. Seasons change, harvests come and go. The heart of Miller County, though scarred, endures, a testament to the unchanging nature of human imperfection, the continuous struggle for connection, and the quiet, persistent search for peace. Pay the Price isn't always a single climactic event. It is a lifelong journey of living with the consequences of one's choices, a quiet reckoning that unfolds day by day, generation after generation.